File this story under the heading, Can the Government Do Anything Right? A gold mine that has been inactive since 1920 spilled 3 million gallons of toxic mining waste, yuck, into the Animas River in Colorado. It happened after contractors working for the EPA cleanup team using heavy equipment accidentally sent it flowing into the waterway. The spill has spread from Colorado into New Mexico and now into Utah, affecting over 100 river miles. Joining us in studio are political psychologist Dr. Bart Rossi, political science professor Alain Sanders of St. Peter's University. Joining us live via Skype is the founder and president of Disaster and Risk Associates, Joyce Sagi, and Mustafa Tabanli, a scientist who also works with us here at EBRU. I will start with you, Bart. What's your reaction to the EPA's contractor creating such a mess?
Well, colossal mistake, but what gets me about this whole segment really is the psychology of the environment, really. I really do think that many in our country take the environment for granted. I'm a psychologist who really believes we should be teaching kids in school about the environment, how to shelter our environment, how to care for it in high school, but we seem to take it for granted in many respects, especially older Americans. They think that we can build and continue to build and economically we'll be more successful, but I really think this highlights the fact that our environment is very fragile.
And the messes that we make can take hundreds, if not thousands of years, in the case of nuclear power, to clean up.
That's right. And of course, the problem here is not so much the EPA, but it's the mine that stored the waste in the cave or wherever it was. And really, it was an industrial sin. The EPA is trying to clean that up, and accidents do happen. So I think it's a reminder to us, not just that mistakes happen, and I think that's the EPA issue, but that corporate industry basically exploited our natural resources very much in a careless way. And I think that's the message that this bill really carries.
Mustafa, what's your reaction to this?
Well, let's remember that there are 22,000 more mines like this, gold mines, inactive, and they might be as polluted as like this. And when they started this project, they asked for super fund. That's money will be poured into this region for cleaning up and good for tourism. Locals were opposing it. They are saying, just leave it alone, don't touch it. And we don't want super funds, we don't want money, just leave it alone. And that gives us a sense that they were aware of these dangers much, much better than EPA does.
That's why local governments sometimes should be in charge instead of the federal government. Let's turn to Joyce, who is joining us via Skype. Joyce, what's your take on this toxic mess?
Hi, Logan. Hi, everybody. Well, you know what? To say that it was a mistake and a misunderstanding, I mean, they crashed in. To me, the biggest concern that I think we need to talk about is the effects that it's having on the people and on the plants. I mean, Navajo Nation, for example, they're relying on 30,000 acres of crops and their livelihood and their stock and 16,000 people. And the long-term effects of cadmium and beryllium, mercury, I mean, these are things that we shouldn't be exposed to. So to everybody else's point, I mean, I think you're talking about people being placed, below politics and profits, and I think that's the issue.
And Joyce, with mercury in the water, we have a real threat to the ecosystem there because mercury is a heavy metal. It'll get into the fish that we consume. So we're actually going to be eating this disaster for a long time, perhaps.
Absolutely. You're talking about 10 times higher the amounts of mercury. And look, I don't even know why they say there's an acceptable amount, right? I mean, mercury shouldn't be acceptable, or arsenic. Arsenic is leveled out right now, from what I understand, 800 times higher than what the levels should be.
Okay,
Alan, I mean, it's sad. You're talking about kidney problems, cancer, and the developmental issues with children as well.
It's frightening stuff. Alan, this is resonating with you.
Yes, I totally agree with you. The EPA should not so much be assessed on the accident, although there should be an investigation of why and how it happened. But the assessment of the EPA should be on what it now does to clean up that mess. And I think you're quite right. This is very dangerous to the economy, but most importantly, it's very dangerous to the health of the people around there, because many of these chemicals will settle down on the river bottom and cause problems for years to come to the crops, to the water supply, and to people who use the river just for fun. So the assessment of the EPA should be, so what is it going to do now? How does it clean it up? What kind of programs does it institute? And that's where the assessment of the agency should be, less so on the accident itself.
And remember, the lead levels were 100 times more than the normal a few days ago. And now they say it's normal at the location, but the river is flowing and lots of lead was settled down and some of them was carried away. Right. So when they are saying it's normal now over there, it's really a damage control strategy that EPA is using, Twitter, social media, everywhere else, just to do this image control, damage control, and it's really very, I think, pathetic attempt.
You know, I asked the question here, do we really understand that we have to live on this planet? You know, I mean, do we get that? Because a lot of times, you know, we're going to just clean this up. We're going to just move and clean it up and we'll move on, and that really wasn't that bad. Well, you know what? I don't think we grasp that we really have to live on this planet as human beings, and we need to take a look at the environment in a totally different way. This kind of highlights the whole mess that we're in, and it brings up the whole issue, of course, a subject we've talked about before with climate change and how people are thinking about the environment and where we are on this planet.
Alan, what I find frightening is the fact that many people nowadays embrace nuclear as clean energy. When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, all of the liberals thought that nuclear energy was horrible. They even threw concerts like No Nukes to get rid of the nuclear power plants. But now it seems like the quote-unquote progressives are embracing nuclear energy, and we really don't have a way to eliminate the waste that stays radioactive for thousands of years.
Right, and I think part of the problem is we are unwilling and have been unable to have a real good discussion on what kind of energy would be best for our future. A real honest debate about the pros and the cons of each form of alternative energy. That hasn't really happened. All you get is sort of fancy lobbying by the advocates of each process with Congress, but nobody really speaks about, so what are the advantages and disadvantages of wind, of solar, of nuclear, of anything else that's out there that many people don't know. We need that discussion, and it's not happening.
And often it's a shell game. For example, if you're driving an electric car, something polluting has created that electricity, so you could drive that car cleanly. So, okay, maybe the car now rides cleanly directly, but you know, we had a coal-fired power plant produce the electricity that makes that car feasible.
Well, they came up with carbon offset, and it's a pretty good measurement, I think. It gives a comparative analysis about those things, and I think we should come up with a way to assess what will be the future damage, what will be the future tab that our sons and daughters are going to pay in the future if we go with this industry. Because if we think about today, that those mines were active 1920s, so somebody made this mess about 100 years ago, but sooner or later somebody's going to pay the price.
Exactly.
So we have to figure this out.
And it's frightening if that mess is a nuclear power plant. Let's turn to Joyce. And Joyce, we know how long cleanups and recovery can take. It wasn't a man-made disaster, but it was a natural disaster, Superstorm Sandy, 2 years ago now, I guess it was, and we're still picking
coming up on 3, yeah.
3 years ago. Tell me a little bit about the recovery efforts there. I know you've been instrumental in helping out.
Well, you know, Logan, we had talked about it last time, about the money and the issues that we're having. I mean, we're about to make disaster history again, yet again, New Jersey, because when money was available from NIEHS, you know, the National Institute for Educational Health and Sciences, there was monies available for New Jersey, and we rejected it clearly, millions of dollars. And now we're shutting down within the next month or so. FEMA is going to be closing down all the public assistance for New Jersey, which is money that could go towards the infrastructure. And you're talking about not having enough funding and everything else. We're talking about millions of dollars. When you say, where's the money is there. It's available. Why are we not getting it into the counties where it belongs? Why are we shutting this down in 3 years when we still have PA available from Katrina as well as 9/11? I mean, that's how far we're going back. That why are we shutting this down in 3 years and making disaster history? People still need help. There's 100 calls a month coming in. And to your point with the nuclear plants, if I may, you're talking about Indian Head just 2 days ago, Ramapo fault line. I've been talking about it on Twitter and everything else. The Ramapo fault line's an issue. We're lucky it was only 2.5. That could have been a nuclear incident as well, and we didn't have this in our own backyard.
Frightening stuff. I think perhaps one of the answers to cutting down on our carbon footprint is being worked on right now by companies like Google and Apple, and those are the self-driving cars, because those cars are being designed not so you and I and all of us can own one, but that we can share one, that they'll be actually put in major cities, and that when you need it, you use it. So instead of having hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of cars stockpiled on the roads, there's fewer cars on the road.
I think this is a good point, because we're talking about politics and the environment here, and I think this might be a way to kind of get around the politics, or at least confront it face on. And I think we need to do that. So I think you're right. This is a good approach to maybe circumvent some of the politics involved.
It's like you said, Alan, we got to do some creative thinking here. I mean,
Yes, we do.
fortunately, we do have some creative companies like Google and Apple that can augment the government's response to cutting down on our climate change issues and our global warming issues.
Right. I mean, we need a much better debate than this is good for business or this is bad for business. We need a discussion of whether this is good for individuals, for the country, and for business. And for that, we need to get rid of the politicization of all of these things and figure out really scientifically and politically, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages, and simply come up with a rational choice rather than saying, well, you're for business, against business, you're for the EPA, you're against the EPA. That doesn't get you anywhere. That just perpetuates the debate, gets people angry, and solves absolutely nothing.
It's fun getting people angry, though, so that's why I do it sometimes.
Yeah.
Trump does that.
I think, Mustafa, it's important to realize that it not only affects us, we share this planet with other creatures, and fish and birds and other sort of wildlife are affected as well.
Well, the corporates are very well establishing this, and they adapt to this. So there's an image problem when they have free market. People who are the corporates are good for environment, sells better. I think government should get certain aspects of corporate world, like firing the responsible person as soon as possible is, I think, one of the solution could be. But the other things too, what makes profit and but keeping people the first, not the company. But there are certain corporate practices that U.S. government should adapt, I think.
Okay. Joyce, as you look at it right now, what are the greatest threats to our environment?
Well, you know what? Whether you want to debate climate control, it's an issue. I mean, weather's being exacerbated. El Nino, you're talking about, is going to be one of the worst. It doesn't matter. And last time we spoke, Logan, of the preparedness. The bottom line is that we've got Ebola. We're looking at avian flu. By the time the avian flu that's affected millions of birds comes here, are we going to be deciding if there's a H2H or a human-human factor, whether or not we have to be concerned with that? The bottom line is that we're not, as a country, as a nation, as a city or a state, ready to handle anything that comes along. And I think all the panelists that are here would agree that it's got to be about, the conversation has to be about not politics, but about people, about preparedness, and we all need to get a seat at the table. The problem is people aren't talking about what's happening. We need to work together for a resolution.
All
You know,
right,
it's about
Joyce,
inspiring people.
Joyce Sagi, thank you so much for your time. Bart Rossi, Alain Sanders, Mustafa Tabanli. We will have more on a whole lot of other issues after this. When we come back, we're going to take a look at how America's main streets are changing.